In fact, there's a certain flourishing tradition in some forms of philosophy that has us celebrating the labor of the oppressed in order to reclaim their dignity or their true human worth. The idea is that, for instance, the work that women do is often seen as less valuable than more, exciting work in the public realm, and then a feminist theorist might come along and say, well, what we need to do is to revalue this labor so as to show the world the important contribution that women are in fact making. Now, I would argue that that kind of strain is fundamentally wrong-headed in the respect that, and here's the important idea, the oppressed person has a dignity that transcends their labor. And it's not quite right to, for instance, celebrate the labor of hoeing fields or cotton picking in order to say that the oppressed person does in fact truly have dignity. Rather, their dignity transcends their labor, which fails to actualize their human worth. And the problem is with a kind of informal social distribution of work that mires some people in forms of work that are less fulfilling than others, and thereby allows other people to have more freedom or leisure. So in short, that's a great question, but obviously not quite what I think. Yes, in the back.
Can I approach that from a slightly different way? When you talked about the sort of dark side to it, it seems that there's sort of an objective component to it, whereas the fulfilling part of it would seem to be defined in terms of sort of subjective things, my self-respect, my autonomy in this. And the example that I'm thinking of here is I was doing some working on Equiano, concepts of work, in Equiano's autobiography. This is the man enslaved in the 18th century. And he writes about this stuff, and certainly he has a lot of self-respect and autonomy because he's more literate than a lot of the non-slaves that are working with him on the ships and so on. He's a clerk and stuff, but at certain points he was actually just having to do the drudge work, the grunt work. In fact, he uses slave as a metaphor. He says, I was slaving at this point. So, well, yeah, you're a slave, but what I'm saying is, even at that point, he sees this as this is worth. I mean, this whole book is supposed to be about how bad slavery is, but he keeps forgetting that and tells the greatness of his story, right? And even at that point, he's getting. This is meaningful work, right? Because I was doing stuff that had to be done and so on, and on any objective thing, carting stuff on and off that ship as a slave can't fit meaningful work, but for him, it is. And so I just wonder how we parse that.
Right, indeed. If we work with a subjectivist account of meaningful work, in which your work is meaningful for you, just in the event that you find it meaningful, then philosophers like me are really at a loss to say that there's anything fundamentally morally wrong with a social arrangement in which some people are relegated to or mired within certain forms of labor that are tedious, taxing, stultifying, not self-expressive, and so forth. And that's really sort of what led me to develop an objective, although multifaceted account of several facets of meaningful work, so that one can critique a social arrangement where some people are in fact not achieving self-realization through work. So indeed, you might have a subjectivist account of meaningful work, but it's not going to have a lot of normative teeth in it to allow us to critique social arrangements. And although there might be some intuitive pull behind the idea that we can't really argue with what you find to be meaningful for you, as a matter of fact, an implication of that is that it becomes less possible for us to critique those social arrangements from an ethical and political point of view. Yes, Professor Otto?
That
Mm-hmm.
And I think that plays itself out in American society with the constant sort of attractiveness in recruiting people in life safety professions 20 years and out. You can retire. Everybody's cranking down, trying to push down how many years you have to work, which means that, you know, there's scenarios with our extended longevity where if you go to university, begin work at 25, retire at 55, and live until 85, you spent most of your life not working.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to fit the sort of desires that are intrinsic in the Judeo-Christian religious perspective, which pretty popular in our society.
Well, perhaps there isn't a kind of single coherent religious ideology about work. Because I do find in the Christian tradition that there is an emphasis upon not only the necessity but also the human value of work. Now, no doubt there are also competing ideals of achieving a work-free paradise. I mean, one is inclined, though, to think, you know, what do you actually do in a paradise to avoid boredom? You need some kind of activity, some kind of way of leaving your mark, constructing something, helping out in some way. You can't just spend your entire, 30 years of retirement sipping Mai Tais. You'd eventually become too bored. But let me give a quote from Pope John Paul II, who writes in a book called On Human Work. Man is made to be in the visible universe, an image and likeness of God himself. It's a familiar enough idea. And he is placed in the world in order to subdue the earth. From the beginning, he is called to work. And in fact, I find that in Genesis also, the idea that part of the purpose of man is to work. Pope John Paul II writes further, only man is capable of work, and only man works, as though what the animals do. When a beaver builds a dam, for instance, that's not quite work, because it does not involve the intentional activity of setting out to transform nature into an artifice. So the Pope writes, only man is capable of work and only man works. At the same time, by work occupying his existence on the earth. Thus work bears a particular mark of man and of humanity and the mark of a person operating within a community of persons. So you find in this quote some of the ideas that, on my account, are important for our understanding of living well as a human being. Particularly, one might appreciate his idea that to work is an expression of one's humanity in the respect that only man works, only man is capable of work, as the Pope writes. If work is distinctively and characteristically human and part of the human essence, if you will, then one is expressing one's humanity in one's work. Yes?
I think, too, in the Judeo-Christian model, the curse isn't the work. It's that it's going to be hard work, right? It's going to be the sweat of your brow, and then it's going to be hard to reap the fruit of whatever labor you do, which I think in the post-lapsarian world. But the other thing that occurred to me was, and maybe this is subjectivist, but I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Brother Lawrence, The Practice of the Presence of God, but he talks about turning the most menial labor, dishwashing, as he did in the monastery, and all these things to the glory of God. And I was wondering can our perspective make work meaningful? And conversely, what do you do with burnout? The idea, when work that technically should be meaningful and is agreed upon socially as being meaningful becomes unpleasant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's that? Some labors that shouldn't be stultifying are.
Yeah.